Welcome back to Books with Brandywine. Today I wanted to share with you guys the books that I read for the Medieval-a-thon, which are these books here, that was running through the month of July. So there were different parts to the Read-a-thon. There was one part which was based on the number of books that you read in the month, and that would determine what your status in the kingdom was, going all the way from peasant all the way up to king and queen. I obtained queendom. I read 6 books this month that were on my TBR for the Medieval-a-thon. I have read way more than 6 books this month. I think right now I'm at 15 because I'm trying to hit 17. So right as of this moment, I've read 15 books this month, but 6 of those books were for the read-a-thon. So the first part was the number of books that you read, and then the second part were the prompts. And each of the prompts had to do with a different piece of armor. And so I have it written in my trusty book. So for the crown, you had to read a character that fights for the throne. For the helmet, you had to read a book with a dragon on the cover. For the breastplate, you had to read a book that was shiny. For your leggings, you had to read a thick paperback. For your boots, you had to read a book with yellowed pages. For your cloak, you had to read a book that had a red on the dust jacket cover. And then you could have 4 weapons. For a sword, you had to read something that was pointy on the cover. For daggers, you had to read a book with assassins. For bow and arrows, you had to read a book with elves. And for an axe, you had to read a book with mercenaries. So I managed to get my crown, which is great because I'm a queen. I got my helmet because I read a book with a dragon on the cover. I got a breastplate. I did not get my leggings because I didn't end up reading Dune. I did get my boots. I got my cloak. I was going for a sword, but I didn't end up reading the Looking Glass Wars. I didn't have anything for the daggers or for the axe, but I did have a bow and arrow. So I would say that's pretty good. I mean, I've got everything except for the leggings for the clothing, and I have bow and arrow. So I'd say it's pretty good. So let's go through the books that I read. So for my bow and arrow, I read Enchanted, and this does have the elves in it. For a little bit, she does end up going through the forest, interacting with the elves. The elves in this book are expert pottery makers, and one guy in particular is just like so good that you look at his pottery and it looks like it's alive. Like if it's a wolf that's howling to the moon, it looks like it's howling to the moon, stuff like that. And so they do feature in the book. This book was a reread for me. It was an old childhood favorite, and I haven't read this book in, I'd say, at least 15 years, probably close to 20 years. And I enjoyed it just as much this time. There were a lot of things that I had forgotten when I was reading this book. There were some things that I had problems with, like the zoo that was in this book, which is weird because I love zoos in real life. I feel like they're a great chance for us to get to learn more about animals, but I felt weird having a zoo with sentient life in it. I was really looking forward to reading more about this book because that's the only thing that I could really remember from this book was the book. And this is it's a fairy item, and it had, like, they never say exactly what its powers are, but as she's looking through it during her journeys, it seems like it shows her whatever it is that she needs to see at that moment, like based on whatever it is that she's thinking about at the time or whatever she's concerned about. It'll show her letters that have to do with that, or journal entries that have to do with that are from the people that are around her and that she interacts with. So she sees letters between her stepmother and her stepsisters. She sees journal entries from the prince, stuff like that. I think she saw a letter that her dad wrote at one point. So it definitely helps her keep in contact with things. It also has really cool stories in it. When the elves are looking through it, the language in the book actually turns to their language so they can read what's going on. But when people that aren't supposed to see it look at it, it looks like it's a manual for, I don't even remember what, for operating stuff. And so it looks like it's the super boring manual. So it's a really, really cool book, and I was actually really looking forward to reading about the book, because I remembered that there was a magical book in the book, but I couldn't remember what it did. And so I did love how she was able to finally break the curse. And in case you don't know, Ella is under a curse that she has to be obedient to any order that is given to her. But if it's not like a direct order, she doesn't have to obey it. But if it is a direct order, she has to obey it. And if she doesn't obey it, she gets really sick. She gets physical pain while she's trying to fight it. And she can usually only fight it for like a minute. So definitely enjoyed this book. I definitely would suggest everybody read it, especially little girls. I think it's a great book for teaching us to, be who we are and create our own destinies and not put up with bullying. I don't know what it is with books and bullying. The next book that I read, and this one was for the Crown, and this was to read a book about, I believe, people that are fighting for, characters that are fighting for the throne. And so I figured that they were competing to find out who was going to be the princess, so they're, quote unquote, fighting for the throne. They weren't really like physical fighting. There was definitely competition between the girls. And so, it didn't get really too bad, but there's definitely strong competition. There was definitely girls that really, really wanted to be the princess and felt like the main character, Mary, was a threat, even though she didn't want to be the princess. She just wanted to prove that a mountain girl could be as intelligent as the normal people in the country. And so in case you don't know, because I didn't know anything about this book going into it, the premise of this book is that whenever the prince of the kingdom is of an age to marry, this council will get together, and I don't remember how they do it, if they like throw stones or what they do, but they figure out what town the future princess is going to come from. And then they go to that town and they pick all of the daughters of the nobles and they send them to a princess academy to get them ready for being princess. But it's usually more of a formality because it's all the daughters of the nobles. But this time, the town that was chosen was a little mountain town that is full of people that work in the quarries to mine this very specific type of stone. And there are no nobles in this town. It's a I don't think it's even a province. It's like a territory or something. So there's no nobles in it. So when they end up making the Princess Academy this time, they actually have to train them to be ready to be the princess. They have to teach them to read. They have to teach them about commerce. They have to teach them about conversation, about dancing, about all these things that the girls would normally already know, because these are mountain girls from a quarry town and they had no need of that stuff, so they don't know that stuff. And they have to stay in this Princess Academy for 1 year, and then at the end of the year, the prince will come and there will be a ball and he will choose which girl is going to be his princess. And so this book follows the entire time that they're in the academy, and a little bit beforehand while we're getting to know the girls before they go to the academy. And it follows some adventures that end up happening while the girls are at the academy. Everybody in this town has this really cool ability called quarry speak. And so they're able to talk to each other kind of telepathically, I guess it'd be considered, by sending like memories and stuff to each other. And that's just how they communicate when they're in the quarry, because it's so loud in the quarry that they can't hear each other talk out loud. And so that ends up playing like a really big part of this book. And it was something that was completely new. I really enjoyed getting to learn about that. And I loved the journey that Mary goes through, learning about, prejudices that they have against the lowlanders, and learning about seeing people for who they are and not what their prejudices are of them. Her growth, like she grows so much through the story. The empowerment of learning to read. I loved this book. I loved the connections between all of the people. I loved the story. I loved the world that she created. I cannot wait to read another Shannon Hale book. She's now one of my favorite fantasy writers. I'm hoping she'll stay one of my favorite fantasy writers after I read some more of her books. But from what I've heard from people, her books are amazing. So I'm pretty sure she'll stay one of my favorites. And then what is this for? For Boots. Boots was to read a book that has yellowed edges, and this book was just barely starting to yellow. This copy is really old. I'm assuming it's really old. It didn't even have the page inside where it would normally say, you know, like with all the copyrights and the dates and everything that's normally in like one of the first few pages is not in this book. So there is no date in this book. So I'm guessing it's super, super old. All it has on it is like this thing here saying the printers on the very last page, or page of the story, and then on the very last page saying it was manufactured in the United States. So I have no idea how old this book is. And in fact, when it just closed on me, I got that taste of like old book. So it's definitely old and it's definitely yellowing. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland has been a book that I've been wanting to read for a really long time. This was my first time reading it. I never liked the cartoon, and I didn't like the movies when they came out. It was just too weird for me, I guess. So I wanted to read the book Alice's in Wonderland, but I was very hesitant to read it. But I did absolutely love the TV show that was in the 90s when, like, I think it was like the Hare and the Mad Hatter. There's the Hare. March Hare was like on roller skates, or is that what they're called? The ones where it's the quad. And so I always thought that was really interesting. So I loved the TV show, and I was like, well, maybe the book's more like the TV show. So this was my first time reading it. I must admit, I liked the book a lot more than I liked the movie. They did make it, I think, more psychedelic in the movie, because that didn't come across to me in the book as much. I mean, it was definitely like a strange world that she was in, but it felt like he had a bunch of really weird dreams, and then he just wrote them down and made them into Alice's adventures. And so I really enjoyed the book. I don't quite understand why people are so obsessed with making like different versions of this and retellings of this, as opposed to doing retellings of like Phantom Tollbooth and stuff, because I felt like this book was so much like Phantom Tollbooth. But I thought it was fun. It was a really fast read. I am looking forward to reading the second one. I think it's called Alice Through the Looking Glass. I think it's the second one. So I definitely had fun. It's not one of my favorite books, but I think it was a good read, and I was glad I did read it. There were some good quotes in here, and I'm excited because now I'm going to know like where the quotes are talking about when you see quotes for Alice in Wonderland everywhere. But other than that, I guess I enjoyed it, but I guess I just didn't understand why it's like so beloved. But that could also just be because I didn't read it when I was little, and just because I have different preferences for things. So yeah, but it's still a good book. I would still suggest picking it up and reading it, because it is a classic and it is interesting. Let's see. Shiny. What was shiny for? Shiny was for the breastplate. Okay, so then I read Mr. Lemoncello's Library. As you can see, it is very shiny. It is a laminated cover. This is the 4th book in the series. It just came out this year, and I've really been looking forward to reading this. I love Mr. Lemoncello's series. I talk about it from time to time. Basically, Mr. Lemoncello, this guy here, is really rich because he makes games, and he makes really, really fun out there games. He's basically the Willy Wonka of the game world. And he had a favorite librarian when he was really little. That was the reason he was able to become a gamer. She really encouraged him to pursue his interests. And so when he became rich, he decided he was going to go back to his hometown, and he was going to create the coolest library ever. Like, ever. And so he made this library, and for the first book, because there had been no library in that town for 13 years, I think it was, he decided to choose amongst the 13-year-olds in the school that had never had a library of their own to be able to go into the library and escape from it. And whoever escaped from it first would be like in all of the commercials and everything for all of his games for that season. And then the second book, I think, was because people were disgruntled that only people from the small town had a chance to do it. So then they chose from people all over the United States, and they got to have a cool competition too. And the third book, I forget what the third book was. I would have to look at it. I know it was another huge competition, but I can't remember who they like chose from for that competition. And then for this one, they went back and chose people from the town again. And for this one, they were going to have like this new game show on this channel called the Kidapalooza, which is like, I guess like Nickelodeon. Like, it's all kids shows and kids gaming and stuff. And they were going to have a new show that was going to be like an escape room show that was going to take place in the library. And it was going to be these rooms that have AR. And so you go in them and you like wear the special suit and it's like all AR and it's just really, really cool. And so they have to, again, escape from all these rooms by completing the storyline. And then once they got the codes from each room, they would be able to unlock their suitcase, which would then have a key that would get them out of the library. And of course, things start going wrong because things always go wrong and people cheat and stuff happens, but it is a fun adventure. I enjoyed, again, getting to find the different references for books that are in it, because that is one of my favorite things about the series, is that throughout the book, they will have references to other books and to different pieces of history, and then if you go at the very end, there's always a list of all of the books that were mentioned in the book. So you've got like 3 pages of checklists so you can try and find everything in it. And it did say that there was another puzzle that was in this book that I haven't had a chance to try and figure out or find. But apparently there's another puzzle that's like hidden in this book, so I'm looking forward to checking that out again. I didn't find out about that until I was done reading it because it was in like the question and answer stuff in the back. So yeah, I definitely love this series. I enjoyed this book just as much as the other books in the series, and this is definitely one of those series that I would recommend everybody read and check out. The next book that I read was Ranger's Apprentice, Royal Ranger, The Red Fox Clan, and this was for the cloak, and it was to read a book that has red on the dust jacket. It's all red. And it's the Red Fox Clan. So even if you consider this orange, there's literally, technically, the word red on the dust jacket, so it counts for both ways, and it's got like red on the side. So this book is the second in the Royal Rangers series, and it's like 20 something in like the whole universe that this takes place in. And so the premise of this book is this guy here is disgruntled because this girl's great grandfather changed the law from it had to be a male heir to take over the throne to it could be male or female, so anyone could take over the throne regardless of like who they were. If they were the next in line, they could take over the throne. And he's disgruntled because he feels like that has stolen the throne from him, and he wants to be the king, and since he's a male heir, he figures that he should be king. So he's going to try and do a coup and kill the 2 princesses, and so her and her mom, who is like ruling the country instead of her father, who's really, really sick. And he figures he's gonna kill them. The dad's sick anyway, and then he'll be the next king. And so this book is setting up him trying to take over. And then there's actually a second book that I have already that I believe it's the conclusion. I don't think this is going to be like a 3-part series. I think this is going to be 2 parts. And because he does that throughout the series, like some of the books will take like 2 or 3 books to tell the whole storyline, and then he'll just go on to the next book after that. And so she is really cool. She's training to be a ranger, but nobody knows that she's training to be a ranger. So he has no idea that while he's trying to take over this kingdom, he's going to be having to deal with a ranger. And it separates into 3 parts. Part of the book follows her dad and the head of the Ranger Corps, who are off searching for members of the Red Fox clan, and they've been drawn away from the castle. It also follows her storyline and what she's doing while everything's going on. It follows her mom's storyline too, because they end up getting separated, and her mom is under siege in the castle. And so it does follow multiple storylines. You guys know, I love this series. I talk about this series all the time. I think the Ranger's Apprentice series is one of my favorite series ever, and everybody needs to read it. Just my personal opinion. I did enjoy this book just as much, even though, like, I knew immediately who the villain was, because when they first, like, introduce him in the very first chapter, he's completely covered. He's all in fox gear. And so, when this other character shows up, and he's obviously not in his fox gear, I was like, yep, that's the villain. And it was. I was right. But, so it's a little bit predictable, but at the same time, it's just such good fun. I love it. And I love the relationship between her and her horse, because ranger horses are really awesome. They're like super intelligent. They're these little squat pony looking horses that are super shaggy, and they're super intelligent, and they're just awesome. And they're like the best companion horse you could ever have because they will watch your back. And I love her relationship with her horse. I also love because her major weapon is the sling right here, and her mom's major weapon too is the sling, but they do differently. And so I love like hearing about that because like with Ranger's Apprentice, like the Ranger's main weapon is the bow and arrow, so that's usually what you hear about. So when you read Ranger's Apprentice, you get to learn about a new weapon. The next book that I read was Hatching Magic, and that was for the helmet, I believe. Yeah, that was for the helmet, and that was to read a book with a dragon on the cover. That book is all about a wyvern that has come from a previous century to our century in order to lay her egg and hatch it. And she is followed by her wizard, who is her owner, and he is trying desperately to find her before his rival wizard can find her. Because if the rival wizard finds her, then he will use her to kill him, so he can take over as the main wizard, I guess. And at the same time, there's a little girl that's in our time period that is obsessed with wyverns, and she is having her own storyline that's going on, I guess. So this book is hard for me. I did not like the book. I found it very boring. I found it tedious and repetitive and just dumb. It just wasn't my book. Reading it, I did feel like if I had read it as a middle schooler, I would have enjoyed it a lot more because I would have been able to relate to more to the girl. Mostly it was the girl that was bothering me. One of the things I probably felt like would have been different is if I didn't have an expectation of what the story was going to be before I went into it, because that not matching that story was a problem for me, which is one of the reasons why I try so hard not to know anything about a book before I read it, because I don't want to have that expectation in my mind and then be disappointed when it doesn't match that expectation. From what I've heard, a lot of people love this book. So, like if you read it, you might love it, you might hate it. It could go either way. Like I said, a lot of people love this book. A lot of people, this is one of their favorite series. So, definitely, like, if you think you might like it, I would still suggest trying it, seeing if you like it. It is a fast read. It's not going to take you too long to read it. It's not like it's going to, like, take up your whole entire life if you end up not liking it. But if you do end up liking it, then great. That's great, because I like it when people like books. So, but me personally, I didn't care for it. That's why I don't have it here to show it for you. I've already donated it to a little free library. I wasn't interested in it. I didn't feel a need to keep it. One of the things I did, and most of these books I've talked about in my wrap-ups for the Book Junkie Trials too, so if you want to know more in depth about the books, like, check out those videos too, because I was talking about less books in those videos, so I was able to go a little bit more in depth. But one of the other major problems that I had with Hatching Magic is it's about a wyvern, but then they specifically change everything that makes the wyvern a wyvern, and basically just make it like a cat-like dragon, like a normal European dragon, and not a wyvern, but they still call it a wyvern and say that everybody's definition of a wyvern is wrong, like it literally says that in the book, which was probably me just being a little bit too prideful about dragon lore and getting frustrated with that. So, those were all 6 of the books that I read. I was also planning on reading Dune and Looking Glass Wars, but I'm not going to have time to finish those books before the end of the month, and since I have already met my goal as queen, I figured I would just go ahead and tell you guys about the read-a-thon and go ahead and wrap it up. So I will see you guys in a couple days, hopefully with my wrap-up for the Book Junkie Trials, but most likely with my TBR for the Newt's read-a-thon, because I really need to get on making. I haven't even looked at the thing. Like, I don't even know what my career is going to be, because I read like all of the books, so I could choose any career, and I haven't even looked yet. So I need to get on that. So that's probably what the video is going to be when I see you guys on Wednesday. Anyway, see you later. Bye.